is Corey Nicholson. I'm from the Theta Xi chapter. I was initiated in 1976. I graduated in 1979. I have been active. I was the Phi of the chapter, the Alpha Phi of the chapter, which in those days was also Rush chairman. I was also Elder Alpha Phi, Gamma, and Phi, Elder Phi eventually. And I was lucky enough to be Phi the year that Animal House came out. And it was very interesting, and I had to make sure that I could manage the process. But it was also a very good time because I had a lot of friends who were, I was from just outside of Montreal, and I had a lot of friends who were coming to universities in Ontario and elsewhere, and as well as McGill. So I convinced my old friend Guy Bennett, who I had known since he was 12, to gather a group of guys and restart the Theta Phi chapter in 1977. And then I had to convince a whole bunch of Toronto guys that we have to do this. So we kept coming back and helping them to run parties at their house because they had a house back then. And it was really, really a lot of fun. And we got to know these guys really, really well. They became as good a group of friends as if they were at our own chapter. And so we decided to take the show on the road and do it at McGill as well, and convinced my old friend Guy Bennett, or not Guy Bennett, but Greg Akins, who had also started sailing with me at the Royal St. Lawrence Yacht Club in Montreal, to maybe replicate this in Montreal, and let's make a go of it. And got a whole bunch of other people that I knew from the yacht club and from other places, Selwyn House School or Canada College, and they all jumped at the opportunity, and we managed to initiate them in March 17th. I'll never forget, it was St. Patrick's Day weekend in 1979, and they've been going for, well, almost 40 years straight. So when I heard about all the problems, Sim Brigden was telling me when he was on staff of all the problems they were having trying to get things going at Dalhousie, and I was thinking to myself, well, how difficult could that be? And so I decided, we should try something. And since I had daughters, my brother Jay also had daughters, so he has 3 daughters. I have 2 daughters. So I decided, well, there has to be a practicality, and we were fairly practical in that we allowed our daughters to have friends over, and being environmentally conscious, when the parties were over, I started discovering Mickey bottles in all the recycling bins. So since I hadn't bought any of them, I put 2 and 2 together, and every time one of her friends came up to get some ice, if he was male, I say, well, listen, why don't we talk about fraternity for a moment? And so we managed to get 4 of her buddies who were going to Queen's University to join the year that Alex Martino was president. And that was right after the 2010 convention, which is when I started getting some interest in meeting up with Brock Clancy and a few others, because Brock Clancy was really critical and pivotal in any of this stuff. And then when we were going to do Alpha Mu, in 2011, I convinced Dave Hunter to allow Sim to come with me, and because Sim knew Dalhousie or Halifax well, and so we went twice in the fall, twice in the spring, and we were able to initiate them in the spring of 2012, getting a couple of my daughter's friends, a legacy from Montreal, my nephew. My brother-in-law, Andy McNair, is a Toronto Zate, and he's actually here at the convention, and his son joined, and then his second son finally has joined and is one of the keen guys there right now, and he's got a third son that'll be coming up for the fall of 2019, so I'm looking forward to that. I got involved in the reactivations. I wanted to actually promote the Zeta Psi Foundation of Canada, so I went out and started meeting with elders and young young people who, because we had some, Brock Clancy said, well, there's 4 guys who are there who are Alpha Psi brothers, literally brothers, and they're going to UBC. So I said, okay, I'll meet with them. And so I went out for them, and it's British Columbia, so we could go out for drinks. And then we had another rally, and then we all went for brunch on Broadway, and some of the elder elders came out, and we had a great event, and it was a really good pivotal time. And it's funny, you know, these days, and particularly in those days, I was working on the trading floor at TD in foreign exchange, and so I was sort of needing a little more sleep, and I was thinking, okay, Sam, well, we'll stay as long as this brother Peter Hebb does, who was about 71. And needless to say, he stayed till 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, so that's as early as I could leave. And one of the other brothers, who was about 65, stayed till 6. But I left at 3. What a guy. But we had the big dinner the next day, and Brock Clancy threw a pickle, and apparently we can't ever go back to that club, but this is what happens. It was all in good fun, and UBC is still going strong, and I'm glad with that. And then on a subsequent trip where I came out to see them again, I had also gone to see Max Anderson when he was president of Mu Theta, so I visited them a couple times and discovered that for $35 more I could go on my way to Vancouver, stop in Calgary. So I hosted a few Calgary elders for some drinks, and we had lunch with a bunch of other elders. And then I met the next day with a breakfast at the hotel that we were staying at, and a whole bunch of elders came, and we agreed to resolve some outstanding debts that they had, and they agreed to a payment plan. So that was a win-win, and we figured that was good. And really, I have to give a lot of credit to Sim Brigden, because he made all the arrangements to meet with people. And he just rent a car and we drive. It was great. And I was luckily with TD able to get some great deals at hotels, so we could stay. And I mean, obviously I paid for it, but it was still, you know, I was getting a 5-star hotel in downtown Vancouver for $120 with parking and in and out privileges. Can't beat that. So it was all good, and then we did meet the subsequent year with a whole bunch of the guys who were rushing to reactivate the Chi Gamma chapter. And subsequently, I haven't been able to be quite as active, although I was active enough to go to a couple of the elder dinners in London, Ontario, and to help reactivate with my younger daughter's friends. 4 of her friends were at the reactivation for Alpha Theta and at Waterloo, and we agreed, I think it was Andy Nunez agreed that we would change the charters so it would be Laurier Waterloo, because they're literally within half a mile of one another, and we were going to be drawing on both, and you know, it was, and we'd go and we'd just go up there and we'd run some pizza parties at this one little place that did a bunch of stuff, and you know, it was a great event, and found out a couple of them couldn't do pizza, so I said, well, just order something else on the menu, we'll just have it. And we did that. It was all good, and I got a whole bunch of these guys, including my daughter's best little friend since she was 2, into the chapter, and so I was a happy camper. And we did all the initiation at Brock down in St. Catharines near Niagara Falls, and it was great. It worked out beautifully. Don't be afraid to make a call. I mean, you know, a lot of elders, I mean, some elders don't mind being emailed or whatever, but if you know their number, I mean, we used to do a lot of phone blitzes. I used to be on the phone phoning elders saying, you have to come out to this event. It's going to be a lot of fun. And not only that, this friend of yours is going to be there. And then they'd say, well, that's great, I'll get there. And then I'd phone the friend I said was going to be there. I'd say, well, this other guy's going to be there, so you better come there. And then I'd phone 2 or 3 other of their friends, and then by the end of it, they're getting a big reunion of 8 of their buddies. I even called the father of a guy I went to school with in Montreal, who I bumped into his sister at the University of Toronto, and we were having our 100th anniversary in 1979. And I just mentioned to her, I said, sorry, we're the Zates, we're, you know, whatever and party just because I think Perry Rosenberg was being a little obnoxious that night. And she goes, "Oh, I know all about the Zates. My father's a Zate." I said, "From where?" And she goes, "Toronto." And I said, "You're kidding." So it was the same year that we were rushing and redoing McGill. So we had literally, it was 2 weeks before we were going to have the initiation in Toronto. I went to Montreal, made a call from my aunt's apartment. There weren't cell phones back then. Got him on the phone and said, "Listen, we're having this big party for the 100th anniversary. Do you think you can come?" And here he was, the head of Consolidated Bathurst, now known as Consolidated Abitibi, one of the biggest forestry companies in the world. And he said, "I'll be there. I'll see you there." And the first person he wanted to talk to, strangely enough, was me. I think in networking, never be afraid to talk to a Zate. Never be afraid to, if somebody, I've always told the undergraduates, if they need a reference, unless I really think there's something wrong with them or they've done something terrible, I will give them a point of reference. And, they can say, okay, retired, vice president, director of TD Securities. I'll speak to their topic and we'll go along with that. So you shouldn't be afraid of asking and talking, but you have to look like you want to be that alpha male that's going to be, okay, I want to go into that company. And also chapters have to remember they should be doing those pictures on the wall like what we saw at the Cornell Zate House. Now that's how I discovered that the president of TD Bank was a Toronto Zate. I never would have known, and I saw it in the 1950s, and he's there for 4 years in a row. So we happened to have a big conference where it was an internal conference showing off things, and I was doing foreign exchange and pitching it, and along he comes, and I gave him the grip. And he said, "Are you a Zate?" I said, "Yes, sir." So we had a great chat, and we had everything else, and every time I saw him, I gave him the grip. My brother ended up working at TD Bank. He gave him the grip, and when he was working for the main branch, he had to play Santa Claus. I don't know why, but anyway, he had to play Santa Claus. He's a little bigger than I am. And he gave him the grip, and the manager said, "Can I learn that?" And the president of TD Bank turned to the manager and said, "Not in your lifetime." So it was all fun, and that's part of it. You've got to realize these guys were all kids too. Peace, prosperity, and strength. So what that means is Zeta Psi should be, you never retreat. I remember that from talking to Jim McLaughlin when he took over. Everything was really things were tough, and back in the 70s there were only 2 chapters that were active in Canada, and that was the Theta Xi chapter, which has been continuously active after the Great War since 1919, and the Pi Epsilon chapter in Winnipeg. So he just sort of said, "Listen, when everybody else says it's time to quit, it's time to charge." And that's what you have to remember. So you have to have good dialogue, and you have to be able to say, okay, I can disagree with you. I'm maybe politically, I'm on another side of the row or the chamber, but we can all have a beer and just sit and chat and talk. And it's great when you talk to people from different jurisdictions because they'll give you a different perspective on things. So to me, you can always learn. And as far as strength goes, our strength is the fact that you're a Zate for life. And that's why I'm wearing my Zate for life pin, because I was one of the first people to sign up for that. And that was, I guess, Sims McGrath was doing that at the time. And he was a really strong guy. And of course, my friend Sim Brigden. And I just said, "Okay, Sim." He finally had to do it, and we'd just go and we'd sign up people. As soon as these guys were graduating, we'd say, "Okay, sign here." And you get a credit card, that's good. And that's what you do. But the fact is, you have to prosper. The Grand Chapter or the IHQ, none of the board members get paid. None of them have any of their expenses paid for. That all comes out of their own pocket. So I think it's really important that we appreciate that even the staff, it isn't like the staff are being well paid. They're just getting slightly better than Starbucks, except they don't get any free food. So the big thing is really at the end of the day, um, we're all brothers. We're all brothers, and this is really the fantastic thing about our membership. I mean, just looking at Tom Jewett, and anybody who went into that Cornell Zeta House and saw the plaque for Tom Jewett and his wife, realized just the amount of dedication. And Greg McElroy is another one who's just had so much dedication for just decades, and Jim Younglin, and Doug Donaldson, and so many more. There people like Sim Brigden, and Dave Hunter, and Locke, and there's just you could and Stu Bowers, Mike Freeman, all those guys. They're just incredible guys. And they really work hard. I mean, I'm always amazed when I see that we have this incredible network of lawyers that are on their time giving us such incredible advice. Whether you're alluding to Dave Busacca, or of course Kevin Canavan, who can take you through literally the process of what we're up against, what the problem may be. He's had to go through. He's been hired by fraternities before when they've had mishaps, so he can tell us, okay, how we have to prepare for them. You'll always have to be ahead of the curve in any organization, because if you haven't planned for something and it happens to you, you're really trying to do things on an emergency basis. It's not going to be a happy ending. So I think what we're doing, the fact that we're going ahead and we're looking at things to decide for Zeta Psi that maybe chapters will have to make their own decisions on inclusivity in the near term, and that may evolve over time as well. I mean, certainly I had inclusivity training when I was working at TD Securities. Every manager, people person was taken out and told, hey, we're going to have people from the LGBTQ community on staff, and if anybody is out of line, that's unacceptable. This is Canada's Charter of Rights, and we're going to lead in this. So even though we didn't have to go to those ends right away, TD Bank took ahead of it, and as a result, we got a lot of business because there are a lot of very successful gay businessmen and lesbian businesswomen, and others, and transgender, etc. That, what do you know? They're very happy to deal with a bank that suddenly will have an ad that says, two guys together saying, let's plan for our retirement and buy a cottage. Get the mortgage from TD Bank. Why not? My brother used to sell all those mortgages for them, and now he's gotten into real estate, and he's become Mr. Real Estate with understanding every little bit of mortgage sensibilities that you need, and every little bit about where I can find a good guy to get you the best deal on a mortgage, because they all used to work for him. After I was recruiting at Zeta Psi, I could usually tell if somebody was going to be appropriate for Zeta Psi and had that, certain appeal. And I was fairly reasonable in the people that we would rush and take a look at. And it's a little different in Canada than we have here in the United States, because we would just bid people one or two at a time until we had what we thought was a good number, and then we'd initiate them. And so what happened is, in business, I could tell in an interview in the first minute and a half whether somebody would click or not. If they couldn't carry on a proper conversation, I knew that they couldn't be on my desk talking to clients, because they couldn't carry on a conversation. I didn't care. I mean, literally, I brought somebody on who actually didn't have a university degree, and I fought and I fought and I fought, and she became one of the top salespeople, not only in my group, but she graduated to the corporate and institutional desk where she did very well, and then she went out and got a degree in art because I'd forgotten that she'd never gotten a degree, and she's still teaching to this day at the Ontario College of Art. So it just goes to show you, but the customers loved her. They were sad to see her go. She gave a few of them some paintings that she had done, and a couple of them said to me, you know, someday they may be worth something. And I said, well, I've still got mine for that reason. I was always good at generally judging character. So I think that's a really important point, and I got that from the Zeta House because you could judge, okay, is this guy going to be a good rush chairman or a good phi or a good gamma, you know, of the group you've already initiated? And is this, oh, look at this guy. He's a great glad hander. Okay, let's get you talking to the elders. Let's do this. Let's do that. And some of these guys have done an incredible amount of, you know, they've been very successful. I look at Peter Weinbergen, who's the president CEO of Norbord, which is once again, one of the bigger lumber companies. And he's actually from a few years after I was initiated. And he's been always supportive of the Zeta House. Both of his sons, his eldest son was one of the phis at the reactivated London chapter, was in the original class when we reactivated them for a second time. And his other son joined at Theta Xi. And you know, it's great to get the people and their sons in, and that's become my new hobby. Have you got a son? I'll go after him. And so people just say, okay, here you go. And I've generally decided a phone call is not enough. I'll just try and make arrangements. I'm going to be in town. Could I come meet with you? Maybe buy you a coffee or something like that. And then we sit down and talk about the Zeta House. And I generally find I would be really remiss if I can't sell somebody on the Zeta House with all these incredible things like an Oxford chapter or a Yale chapter or Berkeley chapter. My God, I should be taken out of sales completely if I can't do that. We have one of the most incredible organizations in the world. So when they come to the convention, they can meet a lot of people, they can have a lot of fun, and suddenly realize that there's a lot of great people that they haven't seen in a few years. I was meeting one of the guys I hadn't seen from Cornell in years just last night. And I dragged all the other guys from my era, because I've got four of my pledge class guys from 1976 here tonight. Jan Olson, Ollie Olson, and Greg Kuzimano, Kuzi, and of course Jeff Ball. And so I was dragging them all over. Hey, remember him? And they were all like, oh my God. And of course I dragged over Cadillac, because Cadillac we all got to know from the Chicago chapter. They originally got to know him in Hartford. I couldn't go to the Hartford convention because my brother was getting married at the same time. So I did go. That was my only other time at the Cornell House. I was on the way to the Hartford convention with my brother's roommate, who was a Cornell Zate, and so we stopped overnight at Cornell. We probably only got to bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, but we had a great time. And so really, it's to reconnect. And you know, we've seen elders who've suddenly decided, you know, I'm coming back just for fun. I just want to see what it's like. And you know, you start engaging with them and talking to them, and you know, you see one of them, hey, you want to sit down with us and have breakfast and let's just chat and see what's going on and whatnot. I mean, I look at, you know, the great people you get to meet, and, you know, there's just, I mean, there's Storm, who's one of the Cornell Zates, and he's from the class of 53. I'd never met him before, except this convention, and he's just a great guy. And every time I see him, I'm chatting with him and talking to him, because he had really a partial career in the Navy that was very similar to what my father did. So, because my father was in the U.S. Navy and then was in the U.S. Merchant Marine for his entire career. So that was important, and I suddenly discover other people doing the same thing, such as Tony Hodgson's father. He suddenly said, I've known Tony Hodgson since we started rushing him in 1980. And he had never told me his father used to be a communications officer in the British Merchant Marine. I said, well, my father was in the American Merchant Marine, also communications commander. So, you know, what do you know? It's a small world. That's why it's fun. And I just found that out at this convention from Tony, because I happened to mention it to somebody else, and he goes, what? That's what my father did. Imagine that that's what goes on. That's Zeta Psi. It's part of the fun.